but you can start to see there's a cluster, you can call it. Jacobin, Democratic Socialists of America, Young Turks, BreadTube, Vosh, Thought Slime, ContraPoints, U.S. mainstream media, MSNBC, The New Yorker, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, Ben Burgess, postmodernism. They're a cluster, you can call it, right? They're not all directly connected to each other, but it's kind of a revolving door. They all kind of can find each other, and they all have the same enemies, which is people like me, people like Max Blumenthal, people that actually criticize U.S. foreign policy, people that God forbid, go to international conferences or call for peace with Russia or work with international media networks, don't only talk to pro-Western media networks. We all become the enemy, and they go out of their way to equate us with Nazis, which, interestingly enough, that goes back to the 1960s. That was a big part of the partisan review narrative, right? The Congress for Cultural Freedom argued that fascism was, just synonymous with any kind of mass populist movement. Susan Sontag, Hannah Arendt, their work was being funded by the CIA, and they made this point. They made this argument. Susan Sontag went as far as to say that communism is nothing but the most successful form of fascism. Well, that's nonsense to anyone familiar with history. Communists were the greatest anti-fascists. Communists led the anti-racist movements in this country, the struggle against Jim Crow segregation. But yet, to BreadTube, if you defend Russia, you defend China, you defend Venezuela, you're the same as a Nazi, because everyone knows that America is the homeland of freedom and civil liberties and LGBT rights, and these countries are quote unquote authoritarian regimes. This is the narrative that the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom have been putting out for a long time, and it was that narrative that led to the fall of the Soviet Union, of the mobilization of the color revolutions, that led to the economic destruction of Eastern Europe. Millions of women sold into sex trafficking, the inflow of heroin, they called it economic genocide, what was done to Eastern Europe, but it was cultivating a synthetic left, intellectuals, middle-class folks to be like, well, we don't like capitalism, but these authoritarian communists are no good, creating instability, celebrating deconstruction as a value, right? Arguing that anyone who tells you there is a truth is an authoritarian. Anyone who tells you that there's something worth fighting for or dying for is an evil authoritarian fascist trying to, con you and manipulate you. And you'll notice this is very similar to the message of Steve Hassan and his cult awareness network, right? Postmodernism, synthetic leftism, again, this cluster is there. This is what you can call the postmodern current that believes in a world where people don't sacrifice for bigger causes, people don't identify with a group that's larger than themselves, people just kind of do their own thing and think their own thing, and we celebrate destruction one ideology or one monument at a time. This is kind of their worldview, and it is leading to all kinds of depression. Look, so many young people in the United States are becoming drug addicted. So many people are committing suicide. Why? Because human beings need ideology. Human beings need to be able to point at the map and say, this is where I am. You are driving a car. Imagine you're driving a car. And, when you drive your car, you know where you're going. You know where you came from. You know how you're getting there. But imagine you were driving your car and all of a sudden you didn't know where you were coming from. You didn't know how you were getting there. You didn't know where your ultimate destination was. You would stop the car, right? And that when you deprive human beings of ideology, of a cause, of truth, and you just tell them that everything is a matter of opinion and don't believe in anything, that leads to widespread demoralization and deconstruction. And Western civilization right now is falling apart, largely because a lot of the racist ideology and chauvinism that these countries were founded on is being dissected. Well, that's good, but it needs to be replaced with a revolutionary, anti-imperialist and socialist ideology. We don't just need this big confusion, which is what BreadTube and the CIA and MK Ultra and Steve Hassan and MSNBC and Young Turks are trying to promote. And it's very, very dangerous. And ultimately, the ultimate conclusion of it is probably going to be the triumph of the far right wing. If they get their way, because human beings need ideology, and if they don't get it from the left, they'll get it from somebody else.
But I think it also does serve a purpose, as your title hints at, in bolstering imperialism and getting the left to support imperialism. And we saw that with TYT pushing Russiagate. We saw that with even within the Green Party, Howie Hawkins embracing Russiagate and demonizing Assad. We saw that the Gravel teens again putting out a quote, putting out a tweet in Mike Gravel's name that he did not agree with, saying that it was a mistake to leave Syria. And we see that with Vosh, who's seemingly saying that China is more of a right-wing fascist nation than the United States, which is just ridiculous. So, I mean, that's a big part of it too, right? Is just getting the left in the US to either be apathetic about foreign policy or support what the CIA and what the military industrial complex is doing.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. I mean, that is a very, very big part of it. And what scares me more than anything is that it seems like now the right is more anti-war than the left. You know, Donald Trump said he was going to end the wars. He didn't. You know, he actually escalated, brought us to the brink of World War III. But he, you know, Donald Trump made an anti-war appeal, whereas the message to the left was that Donald Trump's a traitor. He's working for the Russians. He's, you know, a foreign agent. He's not loyal to the homeland. Yeah, I mean, this is very, very, very scary. This narrative where suddenly leftists are defenders of the status quo, and it's the right wing who look like they're the revolutionaries. You know, I think we know where that ultimately leads. It's very, very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous, and it's not what Marxism is all about.
So do you think that this is all being influenced at a higher level? Or, you know, I kind of personally wonder too, if some of it might just be generational. So you and I think we're a little bit older than some of these BreadTube folks. And I think, you know, I personally got involved in politics during the Bush years and protesting against the Iraq War and Abu Ghraib and the Patriot Act. It seems as though a lot of these BreadTube folks weren't really around then or didn't really have an understanding of politics. I believe that you got involved in protesting imperialism around the same time. Do you think that that's a component of this, or do you think it really all kind of is being influenced from the top down?
Well, I think there's a component of that, sure. I mean, look, I mean, a lot of younger folks that come around, they don't really, they just are not familiar with the history. We all learn. I mean, when I was coming around, there were a lot of concepts I didn't understand. There were a lot, I mean, we all are learning. But I think this is there to kind of take advantage of that, what do you call it? That newness or that, you know, lack of full awareness. It's there to take advantage of that and misdirect people. You know, I think people are coming around in an age where, yes, the Vietnam War was a really long time ago. And, you know, the memories of the 1960s are very much in the past. The 1930s, people just don't even know history very much. And at the same time, you know, the Soviet Union did fall, and global communism as a movement is not what it once was. I mean, it has changed a lot. And so it's kind of seizing on this moment where there is widespread ideological confusion. And seizing on it to direct people in a bad way. I mean, yes, you know, that's definitely a factor that people are young, but you know, they're pouncing on them in this moment and pushing them in the wrong direction. I think that's what BreadTube is doing.
Do you think that it's possibly also a class issue as well? Again, because the Gravel teens, you know, they went to Oxford and Columbia, and Emma Vigeland, you know, she has rich lawyer parents. I think Vosh's father is involved in Hollywood, and he's from Beverly Hills. So do you think this is partly a class issue as well?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, BreadTube is largely a suburban entity. If you look at who the fans of BreadTube are and who the BreadTubers themselves are, this is the suburbs. This is the children of doctors and lawyers. This is those wealthy places outside of major cities, outside of Los Angeles, Northern Virginia, Long Island, New York. You know, this is where this comes from. And a lot of that is that these younger folks have lived a very, you know, because they're living at the top of US society, they're from the middle class. They live a very much more, you know, less authoritarian life, I guess you could say. I mean, in the South of the United States, for example, most southern states of the United States still have corporal punishment legal in public schools. You go to school in Texas, you go to school in Alabama, you go to school in Mississippi, you might get paddled in school, right? I think you go to very working class neighborhoods and urban centers in the United States or in the South or in the Midwest, almost everyone knows somebody or has a relative who's in the military. But if you're from one of these suburban backgrounds, you're not going to know people in the military. They're definitely not going to have corporal punishment at your school. You might not even have to call your teacher Mr. or Mrs. You might be able to call your teacher their first name when you're in school. You might not even have to ask permission to go to the bathroom, right? And that middle class folks live a much more, I don't know what the term would be, a much more liberal, free life, right? They're much less confronted with authoritarianism. So they look at Donald Trump and they see his kind of authoritarian appeal, and that scares them. But then they look at Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Russia, China, other anti-imperialist states. They see the authoritarianism there. and they equate it. In their mind, it's the same, right? It's all the same because they're afraid of authoritarianism. They have the ability to live a very comfortable middle-class life, and they see defending that middle-class, liberal middle-class life as being what it's about. What they don't realize is that middle-class liberal life that they have is dependent on the existence of authoritarian institutions. The only reason they have that high standard of living is because imperialism has plundered the developing world. The only reason that they are able to live that comfortable life is because there's these rigid authoritarian right-wing organizations called police departments that often have a very authoritarian attitude among them, and that liberal society, this kind of postmodern liberal society where everyone can just do their own thing and everything's a matter of opinion, is propped up by illiberalism. And that's what they don't seem to understand. They seem to assume that because they had this cushy middle-class upbringing where they were not confronted with authoritarianism, that can just exist for the entire world. Well, I would argue as a Marxist that eventually, yes, we could get to a world without authoritarianism. We could get to a world without any state or any coercion, but that is dependent upon economic development. It's dependent on people being raised out of poverty. And that is what China has been trying to do by raising its country out of poverty, by building up the productive forces. And that is the ultimate goal of socialism, is to raise the living standards and create a society with so much abundance that people can just kind of do what they need and take what they want, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. That is the goal. But the middle class of Western capitalism only exists because there are illiberal institutions propping it up. And that's what they don't seem to understand. And that also that freedom is not just this abstract value, right? You didn't have anyone in history talking about human rights or civil liberties until like the 1400s in Europe. And why is that? Because people are just evil? Were people evil until that time? Of course not. It was because never had we reached the level of economic development to necessitate and give birth to that level of freedom. And that freedom and the way human societies are organized is directly related to the mode of production and to the historical trajectory of economic development. And this is very important because you get the voices on the right, like Jordan Peterson and others, that say, oh, lobsters have hierarchies. It's just in our DNA to have a hierarchy. Hierarchy is just natural. Well, it is in our DNA to have hierarchy, just like it's in our DNA to run. But we don't run all day. We run when we need to or when we want to, right? And that humans do form hierarchies out of necessity. But it is through economic development and the advancement of technology that those hierarchies can be loosened, right? And that it is through the struggle to eventually get beyond scarcity and get to a post-scarcity society of vast material abundance that we can see the loosening of the authoritarian structures and making it an abstract value that, there's good countries that have freedom, there's bad countries that don't, is completely obscuring this very important historical materialist Marxist understanding.